thank you, Lip, for hosting us. It's great to be here. And the beer is pretty good as well. Anyhow, I'm going to talk about animation in AngularJS. I've been using Angular for maybe 1 year now. And I have to say, for this talk, I got to dig deeper into animation in Angular, and I realized I know nothing about animation in Angular. Having said that, I will introduce you now to the basics of animation in Angular, which is a good starting off point to explore yourself. But before we get into animation in Angular, maybe it's good to talk about animation in general a little bit. I think it's very important to use animation in a very conscious way. It's really easy to abuse it. Let's put it that way. Also, let's remind ourselves, if we're web developers, we're probably not animators, so maybe we'll get to it. Anyways, this is mostly taken from a talk by Jeremy Stuckey about animation in data visualization. There's 3 core uses of animation that are applicable in web development right now, as far as I believe. You can use it for narration, meaning you tell a story with animation. So let's look at some of the examples. And now the fun thing starts. So as you can see, animation can be really emotional as well. There's another great example of this.
That's so great. That's so fun.
Maybe, those are extreme examples, but I think it's really important to have a breadth of what's possible with animation. Maybe we can stop at half the year. You get the idea. Anyhow, animation can also be used to encode information. You've probably seen this many times with something moving. Like you look at some object that's moving on the screen, and encoded in it is the information of speed, right? Here's an example of radiation being encoded into an animation. This is solved with GIFs, which is great. However, I think the part that's most relevant for web development is transitions. But still here, I still use the example from data visualization because I feel it shows more the extreme of what you can do. The examples I will actually show with Angular are pretty boring. So for example here, you have a transition between different views of the same data. And the really exciting thing is like all of that stuff you can do on the web now. Like you have all this power. So now we'll, generally, so if you want to learn more about how to use animation, there's a talk by Jeremy Stuckey which was held at Graphical Web. There's also a video of it. He put together 10 principles of animation which are really relevant to web development. Check it out. So anyhow, in Angular there's this module NGAnimate. How many of you have used NGAnimate? So good. I will tell you what you already know. Basically, it's really simple. You add it to your project. You declare it as a dependency, and it will enrich your directives with animation triggers. There's 3 ways to perform animation. You can use CSS3 transitions, which is the recommended way for most of the things you will do, which mostly you can do in pure CSS. So it's nothing really specific to Angular. Having said that, Angular provides you with the help to properly trigger the transition when you want them to trigger. You can use transition and CSS3 animations. The difference there is one, you're just transitioning from one value to another. With the animation, you define different keyframes and control the animation in more detail. And you can also do JavaScript animations. So generally, the triggers that are most common is ngEnter, ngEnter active, ngLeave, ngLeave active. And during the presentation, I encoded those triggers visually, so you can see what's going on under the hood, maybe. Generally, what's important to know, actually we'll get to it in an example. So let's see. So a really basic thing you might want to do is fade in on the ngIf. The triggers ngIf provides is enter and leave, which is well documented. So when you look up any directive on the Angular documentation, you will see the triggers that it has. And it's basically as simple as that. You say, hey, when you enter, you have opacity of 0. When you enter active, which basically means when you finished entering, you have opacity at 1. And the reverse for ngLeave. So basically, here you see the state. So now it goes out. So coming in, you see it fades to the maximum opacity. Then it has no more ng helping class on it. And then when it's removed again, it fades out. So all you need to do is you add your animation class. You have some if statement that does something. In this case, I'm just checking for the scrolling. Also, I think it's weird that, look, ngIf creates multiple elements. I don't know if that's desired, but anyhow. Exactly the same way it works with ngShow and ngHide. However, you have to do a little bit of a logic bridge because it's confusing, because what ngShow and hide does, it adds and removes the class ngHide. So your entering event is actually ngHide remove. And your entering finish is ngHide remove active. Does that make sense? So, and vice versa. It's confusing, but we'll explain in a second why. Vice versa, if you add the hide and hide active. So let's see it in action. So here's the CSS code you need for that. So exactly the same behavior. Actually, this one never does that, never adds multiple elements because it just operates on the element. So the reason why this is so confusing is you can also animate ng classes. And it works exactly the same way as ngShow and ngHide, except instead of hiding and showing or adding and removing ngHide, it removes your class and adds your class. So basically you have something like this. in your class you just want to scale it up by 1.2. You declare the transition on the add and remove. And in this case, I didn't even have a target because I just, when you add the class, I wanted to have the value of the class and remove it. So you can do it really simply. The benefit of having those additional helper classes, you can do stuff like it pops in instantly and fades out, right? If you just had your class, you couldn't do that. So you need those helper class to cover those cases. So seeing those, this in action scales up.
Sorry, can I ask a question?
Yeah.
This is preprocessor code or?
Yeah, so this is SCSS. I chose to use SCSS here because I think it has to be clear that my class is whatever you want, right? So it's just interpolating my class into the selector. That's all it's doing. So it basically, here you would say instead of this, you would have your class name, right? And your class name will be appended by add and remove. So you see here it's just my class, right? Because actually I defined my class to contain the string my class. So you can do also a little bit more advanced stuff with ngRepeat, which is fun. So basically, I'll show you the code in a second. Like I want to remove this one. I think this is a failure. And then let's add some more. And you get them all animated, right? So the color encoding is the same. ngRepeat has enter and leave. So when you saw them come in, it was all enter events and leave. You can clear them again. Bam, they're out. The other cool thing I can do is I can stagger them, right? So I want to have them leave one by one. So I say leave one by one. So they immediately, all they get is, they immediately get the class ng leave. And then when appropriate the timing, they will be transitioned to ng leave active. Can re-add them. You see they're immediately there. I purposely styled them in a way that you see them. Normally you would style them in a way that they're not visible yet, right? You can basically, in theory, you can do more stuff. Well, you can do a lot more because there's hook-ins for everything. Having said that, once you want to do more complicated stuff, it gets a little bit more tricky. So there's a ng move, which is for stuff getting resorted, right? So what happens in the background is actually I'm just I'm shuffling the array. Having said that, once you want to animate all that, it gets a little bit more complicated, right? Once you want to transition them smoothly. So let's look at the code. Basically, I like to use relative and absolute positions. It just makes things easier. So the toggle I have here, stagger, just triggers the stagger class. And then I set the stagger delay. However, the important thing is I have a ng enter and move, where I immediately set them to 0.0 opacity, so you can visibly see them. And then they will gradually fade to the active state, and the same with leave. I think should be fairly understandable. The template looks like this. I hacked a little bit with the height. Don't hard code the values. And so that's basically the principle. Like, so all you really have is triggers to enter and leave, to move, to add your class or to remove your classes, and the rest you should do in CSS, like always. And that's actually pretty great because you can build cool stuff without learning specifics. of Angular internal workings of animations. And it handles the proper timing of all your triggers.
Can I ask another question?
Yeah.
You have there a transition delay of 1 second.
Yes.
But in this stagger example, they were waiting for the previous one to finish. So how is this possible? If all of them get the class, they do it at the same time, right?
Yeah. Yeah, it's more complicated than just adding the class. I haven't looked at what it does under the hood, but basically the nice thing is you declare the stagger logically for you, like it's a stagger in between. I guess in the background it multiplies it appropriately.
So it checks with JavaScript if the animation is completed and then adds the next one.
Yeah.
So stagger is an API feature inside of NGAnimate, or is that just a class?
Yeah, it's a feature of NGAnimate. I don't know the internal workings of how it implements the hook, but basically it does pretty crazy things with your reading different timings from your classes and so forth. So having said that, like the thing that's not awesome about this example is I actually would want, you see the ones that actually move in the array, they get the yellow color, they actually don't animate to the next position. And to get that working is a little bit more difficult. Basically, you have to start using the hooks, which it has, and transition smoothly. I cannot get into that in detail. However, the nice thing is hopefully there will be a new part to NGAnimate that will make even more complex transitions simpler. And basically, at NG Europe in Paris last fall, Matthias Nimela presented NGAnimate layout. And I think that's the future where it will go. However, it's not in a production release yet. So I wanted to use it for a project I was doing in December because he presented, I don't know, when was NG Europe? October, November. So anyways, like in his talk, it always sounded, oh yeah, it's gonna land in 1.3, and so it hasn't landed yet. At least I didn't notice. But let's look at it just to get a feel. And this is now part of his presentation. If you have time, watch his talk. A lot of the NG Europe talks are pretty good. So basically, the whole series, you know, your layouts gets more and more complex. Your animation layouts. You actually, let's put it another way. Like transitions are simple, but eventually you will have transition and animation flow that are fairly complex. And the way it's declared with CSS is not very convenient. And basically, they're building a tool to do it more declaratively. So here's an example of a simple list. You get in, bam, there you are, right? So that's not ideal. And his slides are really funny. It's not my humor, but it is funny, especially if you watch him present it. So he's written this experimental module. API is not final. I'm sure it has changed by now. Basically, you would have a declaration like this, where you can define how you want to animate things. And it would be separated, right? Like you would no longer add classes everywhere for your animations. So here's an example. You would have an NG animation. You would have a NG animation sequence on enter with the selector Lee staggered by 500 milliseconds. Underneath you have the list. And now the real magic happens, right? It goes one by one. And it feels much nicer to do it this way. So hopefully this will soon be an API that you can use. So the other part of the demo is this animation layout would also be able to take care of those transitions. This is actually a really, really difficult transition traditionally because you have one object in one view and you want to migrate it to the next view, right? And that's not easy to do with the current setup. I can later show you an example if I have time. Where because this was not ready yet, I did it a different way, which is annoying, and start working with root scope and stuff like that. I hope he has the code. Yeah, now he goes on to talk. The motivation to do the animation layouts is material design, which is full of animations. If you don't know material design, check it out. Yeah, it's pretty nice. I'm not convinced that you want to have a bubble when you click everywhere, but maybe. Yeah, you start to control your transitions very nicely with this. So check the presentation out, check the talk from him out. He will explain it much better. Anyhow, further, I'll have some pointers for you. Generally, if you start with NGAnimate, just to read the NGAnimate page, it's not that long. NGAnimate.org is pretty nice. Year of Mo is the site of Matthias, and he has a lot of great examples and blog posts, and basically he will post all the new stuff there probably first. So not only Lip is hiring. NGZRH is also hiring. They're looking specifically for Angular developers. They bought this editor from Upfront, Living Docs. It's written partially in Angular. That's pretty cool. So if you want to work in the web system of NGZRH, you can contact Michael Kniesel, and if you want to be more generalistic involved, you could contact Benjamin Schugel. Anyways, that's just a plug for NGZRH here. How I'm doing time-wise? Half an hour.
Half an hour.
If you want, I can show you an application I've built for NGZRH, which is built on Angular. Yes? Good. So,
Thomas, before you go into this, I have a specific question.
Yeah, let's actually do questions about what I just said.
Oh, it's about Animate also.
Yeah.
Because I have questions for Animate. I don't know. Should we wait until?
No. Let's do questions. Let's do a round of questions.
Okay. My question is, you could fill the whole HTML code with these tags, right?
Yeah.
How is do you recommend any pattern to use in order to be clean? Because I mean, most of the websites don't need all these bubbles and all these things moving around. Do you have any recommendation? I mean, how to use this?
Well,
any pattern, any design pattern that you would recommend?
Yeah, I mean, generally transitions are good to some extent. Like, they should not. Well, I mean, you mean generally with animation and transitions, or do you mean specifically with NGAnimate layout?
Both. I mean, I'm more concerned about animations, the transitions. I mean, I don't want to have every dip in my HTML with a class specific to do that. So, because at the end it's going to be a living mess.
Yeah, so I think ng animate layout will help with that a little bit because you can separate animations from your regular views. So if you want to have clean code, the promise, as I understand, is you basically declare your animation in one file and then include it at the appropriate points. Having said that, the API is far from finished enough to show that. I think he has some example, but I'm not sure if that's the way it's going to be. But basically, it would be just another component you would include, right? Like you would have, maybe you would have a animated list component that takes care of having a really nice animated list. Like, let's say you want to have flight right and flight left and all that stuff. Like, it would be possible to separate it that way. Generally, I also think, first of all, I think you should endorse CSS transitions because they're fast. But also, the other logic that I think is important is if a browser is not fast, or let's say it's not supporting CSS transitions, it's probably best to have no transitions. Because like your Angular app might be slow already on a slow Windows PC with Internet Explorer 9, so maybe you don't need to add transitions. So it's also a nice way, like if you use CSS, it really degrades nicely, and ng animate handles that. Like there's no, you can animate it and it will still work fine without animation. Other than that, be careful when you apply animation. Try to not move huge objects all the time. Animation should be, or transition should be fast, but not too fast, but also not too slow. I think staggering is really tricky because in most cases you probably don't want staggering. Because if you, for example, I've seen a lot of examples with a search and then staggering. Like, what? If you search something, you want to see the result instantly. You don't want, like, you know stuff is going to change. You don't need one by one, right? If you're eliminating candidates, maybe it makes sense to have them stagger out so you can consciously think, okay, now this one is gone, or this one is gone, so forth. So try to have some logic. Does that answer somewhat?
Yeah. Thank you.
I have a question more general. You showed that example with the scrolling, and the CSS was quite clear, but the triggering of the events, when does it enter and when does it leave? Maybe you can go a little bit more into that. You
mean here?
Yes.
But
so what happens there? Yeah.
So basically, what I'm doing there, it's a little bit pseudocode, but I'll show you the actual code. So this one is ng class. Yeah, ng class is the same, I think. Well, but this has nice colors, so let's go with ng show and hide. Anyway, so basically what I have here is, first of all, what I'm looking for is the middle of the screen instead of the scroll top, so that's a lie. Then I have offsets show top. Basically what I have is a directive that provides me the offset function in the view. I don't know, I like to hack those things. I don't know if you're supposed to use it that way. And what I have here, scroll top, is just a variable in my template that represents the window scroll top, which is implemented like this.
Can you make it bigger?
Yeah, sorry. So I save scroll top to my scope, and let's go back to the view. And then here I basically check, is scroll top greater than, or here the real code, right? Pseudocode, real code, is scroll top plus half of the height of the window bigger than the offset top. And the offset top, I'm just wrapping wrapping this. I don't know if you're supposed to do that. Yes.
So is it triggered every time you scroll, or how does Angular deal with it?
Yeah, so right now the way it works, it's actually, yes, it does digest every time you scroll. You should not do that in a complex application with a complicated digest cycle that has to check a lot of things. But you can optimize it a lot, right? And generally, if your digest cycle is really slow, try to optimize that. Because actually doing if 10 is bigger than 20 is not expensive. Actually, the real performance screw up here is it's computing the offset every time you scroll. That's really expensive because that's a DOM operation. Having said that, you can cache that, like you would listen to your elements and say, hey, every time you resize, you calculate offset and like limit the calculation of the access to the DOM. But in this case, for five hooks on a fast MacBook, it doesn't matter.
Thomas, I'm not so much into the internals of NGAnimate. I've used it. I didn't use it so far, this part of Angular. So for me, it was kind of I didn't quite understand how this is causing animations. But now, I think now it starts to make sense. So what it does, the module, is it kind of decorates the directives ng-show and ng-if, and it adds some classes to the diff based on this preparation phase to active and then the fade out phase, basically. Okay, so in the markup there is nothing else than I wouldn't do normally, like ng-show and ng-if. But if I use NGAnimate module, it's going to decorate these directives, so there are kind of animation classes put into the class attribute of my nodes.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, that's the principle how it works with most of the things. Having said that, you can do JavaScript animations. I can show you the interface, but having said that, I haven't used it myself, so I can't really talk about
That's
it.
That's why I always commented out.
Yeah. So yeah, you have all those hooks, right? And you can, there are certain different expectations. Generally, you get a done callback, and it allows you to define stuff quite modularly, right? You basically register those animations on your module, and then you can use them everywhere, which is nice. I generally don't use JavaScript animations, don't use jQuery animate, except if you know why, right? Like there are certain attributes you cannot transition in CSS. My most common use case is transitioning paths, SVG paths. There you cannot interpolate with CSS. And it's not even a CSS property in the first place, so it's actually an attribute on the SVG element. But for that stuff, use these three. It's great.
Or Chartist.
Or Chartist, if you like abstraction. No, it's actually great. These three is more if you want to do really custom stuff. If you just want some charts, like a few bar charts, a few line charts, and have them awesomely responsive, use Chartist. It's actually really nice, the responsive selectors in Chartist. Any more questions? Otherwise, I'll show you the... Yeah.
Like in the first example, you showed that like if you scroll or just tabble or something like that, then it basically switches the classes, adds or removes. And in the first example, I think we can see some flickering. If you do like the events that triggers the animation like too fast, and is there a way where you can prevent the flickering?
You mean here that it adds multiple elements?
Yeah, exactly like that, or I mean like, like in the ng show, the adds the class and then it removes it. But if you do it like too frequently at a time, then the first animation didn't finish, but the next one started and things like that. And can you somehow prevent this flickering effect?
Well, that's basically the reason why it's visually flickering a lot is because I'm adding those helper classes that make it really visible. So if you just had an opacity transition on it without the background color, it would look natural. I think it would be gone. The case with ngIf here, I think it has to do with the transition. So actually this is...
The ngIf adds a new element in the DOM and it removes it. If it adds it twice, it gets two transitions. The show just leaves the element and adds the classes.
Yeah.
If you can open it in the developer tools in Chrome, you see the elements gets removed.
It gets two elements.
Yeah, there are two elements and then one is...
Yeah. What I felt like it's a certain timing issue, like if you're within a certain time, it actually is aware that it still has an element, but maybe it forgets about the element when it starts fading out, so when it starts ng enter. So I guess generally, I mean, if something is coming in and out a lot, you probably shouldn't use ngIf because it's rather expensive. Then you should use ngShow, right? ngIf helps you if you have a large tree underneath, which you don't want to compute until the condition is true. So there it makes sense, right? But if you just want to have something come in and out all the time, use ngShow. If it's the same DOM, right? If you need a completely different DOM, then do a switch or if and so forth. But I think if you didn't have the helper classes, all the flickering would be less obvious. It works nicely. So maybe let's look at the example. Actually, I have to think. I'll show you the... What is it? Don't disclose anything secret, maybe?
It's gonna be on YouTube.
I know. But I don't remember what the project was called. Too many projects. Here, 21. So I hope you guys get to go to those hotels as well. Actually, yeah, this is not an endorsement for this hotel. Even though now you will see a lot of pictures of it. Okay, actually, so... Sorry, I forgot to prepare that. Hold on one sec. Let's go with this version. It has some transitions on it that I don't like. Whatever. So anyhow, this is an Angular application with different views. It's actually leave full screen mode, so you can see the URL. So basically, it has a bunch of images here which you can all click and then they animate in. Can go between the rooms. And this is all CSS transitions. Doesn't even use Angular hooks. Here it actually uses some Angular hooks. You can see this hand comes in and then fades out, which is done with a ngShow. But let's look at the code a little bit. Generally, we use Yeoman NGZRH. We customize it a little bit to work better for us and to include our own styles immediately. If you don't know, Yeoman is a generator to set up a new project. It It has some flaws, but it works all right. Maybe it sets up a little bit too much pre-processing. It relies on grunt, which is a bad thing, maybe. Like if you start from scratch right now, go and use Webpack. Having said that, I haven't seen a great example with Webpack and Angular, but generally Webpack is the way forward. No explanation needed or reasoning.
Why not Browserify?
Because Webpack is better. No, what Webpack actually does is it really thinks about your assets in terms of delivering them in the end. Browserify probably, I know you can do a lot of things, so, but generally Browserify is great if you just want to generate one gigantic file. Webpack goes way beyond, and I think their whole loader system and everything is pretty nice. Anyway, so this is the application. It relies on animation, root. I don't know why sanitize, but it's in the generator. So probably it's good to have the dip. I think it does something. NGZRH, obviously. It is actually fully responsive. I'm a little bit proud of that because hey, it's like works on mobile. It's also a constant struggle with our work. It's like mobile, huh? What? So it has 3 views, main, room, and object, which is fairly clean. The main shows the overview text, this here. The room actually comes first. You go on into a room, it shows you the room text. And then you go on an object, it shows you the object text. I think the interesting part here is you have in the background, you have those elements that exactly should transition between different views. But initially, when I started developing, I thought I'm going to use NG animation layout, but then I looked and it's just on a branch on Matthias's GitHub, and I was like, no, maybe not. So basically the way I'm dealing with that is with the magical of root scope, which is really ugly. So probably shouldn't do that in, yeah, actually let's not look at it too much, but basically, yeah, it's a lot of diffs and repeats. That's how we hack application fast. So what you have to know is, like, generally most of the stuff we do has to go out in a reasonable time frame. So we do stuff like this, where you do a radius calculation in NG style. Having said that, it shows the power of Angular. So don't do this in a long-term maintenance application. Do this in your fun project. Yes, I don't know. What else is really interesting in this app? Yeah, I think here is the only place where I'm actually using transitions, and there's some wrong things in there. Where I'm using NG animate transitions. Anyways, that's basically it from my side.
Thomas, could you do the same application that you did before with the presentation, but without the module NG animate? So we can see what's the difference with these modules.
You mean here, this one?
Yes.
Yeah, let's do that. Quickly have to. I hope I'm not injecting the service anywhere, but otherwise I should just be able to remove it. So basically I mean doing this, right?
Yeah.
let's see.
Because the end show is going to work, but without the animation, right?
Yeah, it should all work, but let's also open the dev tools in case we have some warnings. So let's go a little bit bigger so it's not in. My presentation is responsive. Yeah, it just goes to the neutral state, right? Just your desired behavior.
That's also kind of cool, right? It's kind of
And
progressive
even,
enhancement.
yeah, even this works, right? Just adds the class as normal. Just doesn't animate. This animates because I did a transition, also just the normal transition without, but you don't get the stagger, you don't get any of that. Yeah. Any other questions?
Have you used any animated NZZ in front page or somewhere?
No. No, yeah, sure. No, unfortunately I'm not part of the web team, so fortunately. I will go should have said that. Yeah, no, they're not using Angular in the front end right now. There is a new front end coming up, which is quite a bit nicer. I also think it still has no paywall, so if you don't like to pay for it, go to make sure to have a flash blocker.
Stupid ads.
Yeah. I mean, if somebody does HTML5 ads or GIF ads or image ads, I'm fine, but flash ads, no thanks. So yeah, this site, they're not using Angular, unfortunately. But maybe if you join their team, you could make them. And I think it would be good. Having said that, you know, maybe now everybody will use React.
You told me actually that you're using Angular, but inside of the graphs and complex stuff,
so,
things like this. Right?
I mean, everything I build, I usually use Angular. So let's go here. Yeah, I use Angular for things you shouldn't use Angular, but basically I have this Yeoman set up and then I get Angular and it's still really convenient. Like for example, this is built with Angular, but none of the heavy computing is done in Angular. Like this is drawing 60,000 points, which you probably don't want to do with the ng repeat. So behind the scene is progressive canvas rendering, but still on top of it, like for example, this number here is injected with Angular. This toggle here is just the ngIf or I think it's ngIf, maybe ngShow. The whole like tracking the scrolling, like I did before, is done with Angular. But I have a really fast digest. Yeah. So this has Angular, but mostly these three, right? Yeah, and you saw this project before. I think in this project I didn't use much Angular because it's built on a legacy. No, but generally I use Angular for all the... The other thing, the editor of NZZ is built with Angular, but it's built by Upfront.io. Maybe some of you know it. They're also a great company. If you don't go work for NZZ, maybe you go work for them, or Lib. And they're a really nice team. They did the editor for Watson and now for NZZ. It's not in production yet, unfortunately. But it's publicly known that they will have.
questions? Okay, so a warm thank you, Thomas. I know that there is a lot of work. I mean, probably it seems easy, but there is a lot of work preparing the presentation. And before we leave, I mean, you're going to put this somewhere on GitHub, and I guess, can you? Yeah. And then we will put this in the comments in the meetup. So if you want to check his presentation. And the last thing is, as always, if there is anybody who wants to contribute by any, I mean, they want to present some topic or any project, or they want to help us in the organization, please contact us through the meetup. Okay? So thank you very much, and good night, everybody. Thank you.
Thank you.